Welcome to SQL Answers, the channel where we take focused database and SQL topics and explain them in short, concise videos, one at a time. Hey guys, so today I want to talk about views. So here's some definitions for views. So views can represent a subset of data contained in a table, and really what a view is, it's stored SQL. Think of it that way. So it's SQL that you can store in the database and then reference. A view can limit the degree of exposure of the underlying tables to the outer world. So you can actually give permissions to view, but not give permissions to the underlying table. Views can also be used to join and simplify multiple tables into a single virtual table. And we'll take a look at that. Views can also aggregate data. So you can have aggregations on your data and store that in the view. So it kind of takes the grain of the data and from fine grained to coarse grained. And views can also hide complexity in data. So you can actually map data in your views, provide case statements, anything you do in normal SQL, you can do in the view and make things a little bit easier for the user. And views don't take any space. It's basically just a definition of the SQL. So you're not actually copying the data. You're creating SQL that's going to access the data for whoever's using the view. And depending on the SQL engine used, views can be used for extra security. All right, so uses of views. We touched on this in the last slide, but let's just drive the idea home. So views provide an abstraction layer. So instead of having direct access to tables, you go through the views. And this unlocks several approaches and techniques. So one of the things you can do is simplify someone's view of your database. So instead of knowing all the tables and how they're related, you could just have people query the views, and the views take care of all the relationships between the tables and return the data to the user without a lot of knowledge of the underlying physical schema. Views can also be used for security enforcement. So you could have access to the view, but the underlying tables aren't accessible. And then inside your view, you can also limit what columns that the user can see, as well as which rows you can see, because you have a where clause in your view. And you can also encapsulate schema changes. So let's say that your underlying table changes. You could, let's say you add a new column to your table. Well, your view is unchanged, right? Because the view existed before, it didn't reference the new column, and you're fine. Versus if you had like some kind of hard-coded SQL in your source code that was referring to the table, it might break if you were doing something like a select star. Okay, let's look at some examples. So here I've got a view named VDB translog locations, and its purpose is to tell us where the transaction log is in a SQL Server database instance for each database. So as you can see, it's selecting from sys.master files, which the end user of the view may or may not have access to. So what you can do is grant access to the view to the user, and they wouldn't have access to the physical table. And another thing it's doing here is it's filtering for a particular type description of log. So that's telling us, hey, just look for the transaction logs. And it's got some other logic in here. It's looking at for each database and getting the first file ID. That's all this partition by and row number is doing. And then we're filtering here for row number equal 1. So there's quite a bit of logic going on here. And the other thing we're doing is we're projecting which columns we're going to give them access to. So we're not giving access to every column in the master files table. We're giving access to just these particular columns that we've got laid out here. And in some cases, we're actually calling functions to get the name, to take the database ID and translate it into a name. So I'm just going to pull up the data here so you can see what it looks like. And as you can see, it's pretty simple in terms of the output. We're just getting the database name and where its physical transaction log file is on the system. But we've gone through quite a bit of complex SQL in order to get that. And we've taken that complexity away from the user. They don't need to know the details, which is kind of nice. Let's take a look at another example. So here I've got a view that's looking for blocking locks in the SQL Server instance. So it's going to the DM OS waiting task table, and it's joining it to DM exec connections, and then joining again to DM exec requests, and then there's yet another join to DM exec SQL text. So quite a bit of complexity here that is taken, it's encapsulated away from the user. They don't need to know the details. All they need to do is query the view. We can grant access to the view to whoever users we want access to it, and they can see if there's blocking locks on the system. Kind of nice. Okay, that's it for today. Thanks everyone for watching. Please like if you liked the video, consider subscribing, and if you have more questions, feel free to pass them along either in the comments of the video or the URL below. Thanks, guys.